Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. Today I'm going to do the mid-year book freakout tag. Yeah, I've done this like quite a lot of years in a row. Whilst I wouldn't say I'm especially good at sticking to like what I say I want to read in these, I do think I've like made some progress, and yeah, that was interesting to like look back on, I think, and also useful if you're like trying to figure out if you want to follow someone's channel, whether you like their, if you like their like book taste or whatever. The first question is best book you've read so far this year. I have 4, so I have 3 with me. The first is, this is upside down. The first is When the Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb, which is a YA Jewish historical fantasy fiction book set at the turn of the century, I would want to say, and is kind of about like angels and like demons like shadim and also unions and queer love, and it's just really fantastic. And yeah, I'm really excited to kind of read more from Sasha Lamb, and I also think it has like a really fantastic cover. Then we have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I think this one like just about scrapes through. Like, I mean, I loved it, but maybe slightly less than the others on this list, but still I wanted to include it because I did really enjoy it, and I read it in like 2 days or something, and like I was just like, yeah, constantly thinking about it as I was reading it and very scared. Then there's Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens, which I just thought was like really fantastic, and it's narrated by a 14-year-old ghost from the 1400s as she kind of interacts with George Sand and Chopin in a village in I want to say Mallorca, but that could be wrong. It's great. And then lastly we have Siblings by Brigitte Reimann, translated from the German by Lucy Jones, and I read this most recently, and yeah, this is about a painter in East Germany called Elizabeth, and Elizabeth and her relationship with her siblings, but specifically a sibling who is fairly near to her age called Uli, who wants to leave the German Democratic Republic. Question number 2 is best sequel you've read so far. I did actually sort of read like a loose series where like one book came out and then like a prequel came out to it, but I think that really like some Discworld sequels have to like get this. I'm not sure which I would choose between. Maybe like Masquerade was my favourite of the ones I read at the beginning of this year, but I also read Guards and Reaper Man. I enjoyed those both a lot. I think probably I enjoyed Masquerade the most because it made me think quite a lot, and I really enjoyed that. I just loved the setting, and I loved Agnes, or Perdita X I should say. And then Reaper Man was probably second most enjoyable, and then Guards was the lowest, but I mean I still really enjoyed it. All of which were by Terry Pratchett, obviously, and yeah, I also did reread A Hatful of Sky this year, I think, too, so I mean that kind of could work in, although I do try not to choose rereads unless they're extra special. I mean it is extra special, but that is like the probably 3rd time I've reread A Hatful of Sky, so I feel like it just starts to not really count. The next question is new release you haven't read yet but want to. For this I actually thought I would go with The New Life by Tom Crew, which I feel like is maybe slightly out of left field for me, but yeah, it just seems like the kind of book that is, I mean it's about my era, it's about what I'm writing about in some capacity, kind of like free love, unorthodox relationships, queerness in the Victorian era, kind of like politicized queerness, I guess, but you know, before like political lesbianism was a thing. Anyway, that's probably an anachronistic way to kind of talk about it. Sorry about that noise. But yeah, I think I will probably make a review of this when I finally read it, because I feel like I probably have a lot to say if I enjoyed or disliked it. So question number 4 is most anticipated release for the next half of the year, and I kind of wasn't gonna choose one for this. I'm sort of also trying to like direct my reading attention away from reading like 2020's releases, you know. I kind of want to focus further back on like backlist books, on older books, on classics. You know, by classics I just kind of mean like historical books, because that is where my like major interest lies, although I do, you know, I am excited by the kind of like independent strands of queer publishing that are going on. But anyway, I did sort of pick one because I saw this on, I think it's Scott's channel, Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and that's Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad, which seems to be about I'm not sure if it's the main character is British Palestinian, but it's about like I think, okay, this is very badly done, sorry. But I think it's about someone who puts on a production of Hamlet in the West Bank, and yeah, about that, and it just sounded really interesting, and like I kind of just put it on my TV and then I was like, I'll just talk about it now, but clearly I don't know what I'm talking about, but it sounded really good when it was described to me, so I'm sure I didn't repeat that with you, but whatever. The next question is biggest disappointment, and I think that we'll have to go to No Modernism Without Lesbians by Diana Suhaimi. Yeah, I made a whole video of my issues with it and I was really excited to read it, but what can you do? Question number 6 for biggest surprise, I did actually kind of struggle with. I feel like there haven't been that many like surprises for me, but I mean I think that's partially because I'm quite good at kind of having some kind of sense of like what I'm gonna love and what I'm not gonna like, yeah, so but I did decide to go with Homesick by Jennifer Croft, which I found surprisingly thoughtful and like rich, I guess, in a way, especially considering how people were really antagonistic to it being on the Women's Prize list, because they're like, oh, it's a memoir and it shouldn't be there, but it wasn't a memoir, you know. I think there's a version of it that's a memoir, but there's a version of it that isn't, but that's the same with like loads of books. I mean, you could say that about like Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, or, you know, I don't know, anyway. So because also like as a memoir, it's not a straightforward memoir at all, so like if you read it as a memoir, like, so anyway, there is obviously some like craft going on in how like it's being fictionalized or like worked with, anyway, but yeah, so I definitely enjoyed that much more than I kind of expected to. I just kind of read it because it was like short and I had access to it and it was on the Women's Prize long list, so. But it is very, very sad. There's always a struggle with this one. Favourite new author. I think the only person who I've read multiple things from this year that was new to me is an author called Miranda Mullins, who wrote some historical fiction novels that I was reading, but I wouldn't really say that she was like my favourite new writer or anything. I did read my first Nisi Shawl this year, which I really enjoyed, and I also really loved reading Leah Upi's Free, coming of age in Soviet Albania, is that what it's called? That's not what it's called, but yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I read enough of them to say that they're my new favourite writer, but I did really end up loving like Leah Upi as a person, so that was nice. For question 10 we have book that made you cry, and I think that briefly A Delicious Life did make me cry quite a lot, but I also feel like, and obviously Homesick is also quite sad, although it's also written in quite like a disconnected, dissociated way, so it sort of holds you away from itself a bit on purpose, clearly. But I think probably the most sad book was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which is actually another book that I felt like people were quite unfair about, in terms of, yeah, it as like an intentional novel. It deals with some really sad subject matter around babies. Very sad book. For book that made me happy, I think I'm going to go with When Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb, which I obviously did pick for my favourite books, but like it just made me so happy, so like, yeah, filled me and continues to fill me with joy. Looking at it now, I'm like, I should reread it. It's just really lovely. Very like playful and caring at the same time, which is sort of the best mixture of things, I think. Okay, next is favourite book to film adaptation you saw this year. The only book to film adaptation I saw this year, as far as I know, is the Lockwood & Co series thing that Netflix did, which I watched first, or at least some of first, and then I read the first book in the series. And yeah, it was fine. Lockwood & Co as a Netflix series isn't great, but I liked the world that it was inhabiting, which often happens with like adaptations, to be honest, where you're like, oh, it's really cool that they've like animated the world, but then the way that like they tell the plot or characterization or whatever, it's just like very lacking. Netflix being some churner out of entertainment definitely affects that. And the book was also fine. I felt like one thing that the show definitely did better was dealt with the like violence of what was happening in the kids book a little bit more, because it is a domestic violence story or domestic abuse story, a like intimate partner violence story, which is obviously quite intense for a bunch of like 14-15-year-olds to be sort of like trying to uncover, or at least I think so, especially in a world that is like so aggressively anti-child, that it is employing children to, yeah, deal with a problem that adults can't, like. But I don't think either the show or the book really thinks about that level of like exploitation. For the question of most beautiful book you've bought or gifted and, you know, obtained this year, because I would probably say A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, but like I have already talked about this book and shown the cover off in I think a couple videos now. I thought I would pick a couple others that I thought were like quite beautiful. So I got this, which is The Passion According to Renée Vivian by Maria Mercé Marcal, translated from Catalan by Kathleen McNerney and Helena Buffery, which is really cool. And I think, you know, the cover's quite nice. I also did think that, so I have some like reading for my Jewish conversion. Oh, and I also think The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, that's beautiful cover too. It actually also is like beautiful in general. It's got really nice illustrations and drawings and things throughout the book. But I also did think that this Seasons of Our Joy, A Modern Guide to the Jewish Holidays by Rabbi Arthur O. Waskow has this lovely, I think it's a paper cut, which is this particular form of Jewish like folk art on the cover, which I just think it's very beautiful. Yeah, so those are some alternatives. I don't think any of them quite reach the same level as A Day of Fallen Night, but they're nice. And yeah, question 15 is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I would like to read at least a chunk of this one. I also want to finish this one definitely as soon as possible. I'm about just over halfway through at the moment. And then I have some of my Virgo, no, I knew I was going to do that. Some of my Virago reading, because I do want to still do my kind of like Virago season project. So this is Crimson by Niviaq Corneliusson. So yeah, I'd like to get to this. I did also start reading Deborah by Esther Singer Kreitman, and yeah, I would also really like to read this. And then Mari recently lent me this after reading it and like loving it, and I'm really excited to read it. And this is Everything for Everyone, An Oral History of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072 by Emmy O'Brien and Eman Abdelhadi. And it's in the form of like interviews with people who are like commune members. So this is very exciting. I have also read one story in this, which is this one, which is Kayla Puan on growing up in the North Ironbound commune, and it's because it was released online as a short story, which I'll see if it's still there, because like I'll link it below and then you can kind of read it and see if you'd be interested. And it is very much about like gender, gendered work, and yeah, I read that and then I kind of included it as a sort of modern perspective on what I had been writing about for my master's dissertation, which was sort of about those things in fin de siècle. I said that so like Eccles cake. I always do think of the word Eccles cake whenever I see it written down, like siècle cake. Anyway, I've lost what I was saying because I was being silly. Anyway, very excited to read this, so there's that, as well as like many billions of other things to read. So always, like, I obviously want to be involved with Victober this year, and I also want to read a French book with my mum. I'll read the French, I will not be reading the French version, I'll read the English translation, she'll read the French version, yeah, that kind of thing. Cool. Let me know if you read any of the books I mentioned, or like what you thought about them, and also how your reading is going so far this year. I would say like I'm having an okay year. I think it's recently been picking up again with like me reading books that I really love. I do feel like because on Storygraph I can give things 4.75 stars, it makes me have less 5 stars, which like obviously, but that kind of makes me sad. So part of me wishes that wasn't an option, but because it's an option, I want to use it. Does anybody else feel that way? I feel like 4.5, it's the like 0.25 decimal points that I find quite like harder to deal with, you know, like if there was just, you know, 1 and then 1.5 and then 2 and then 2.5, like I think I'd be happier with that system. I've realized that people complain about like Goodreads not having any kind of like point rating system, and now that I have access to one, I'm like, well, actually I wish it was different. But there you go, I'm a contrary bitch. Okay, and on that note, yeah, I'll talk to you when I next talk to you. I hope you have a nice day when you see this. Bye!